Emma stood in front of the grand mirror, adjusting the delicate lace on her wedding dress. Her heart raced, not from nerves, but from excitement. Today was the day she had been dreaming of since she was a little girl. The soft morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a golden glow across the room. Everything felt magical, almost like a fairy tale coming to life. Her best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, stood beside her, smiling. "You look perfect, Emma," she whispered, squeezing her hand. Emma smiled back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't believe this day is finally here," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Outside, the wedding venue was set up beautifully. Rows of white chairs lined the garden, filled with family and friends who had come to celebrate her special day. The air smelled of fresh flowers, and a gentle breeze rustled the elegant decorations. At the end of the aisle stood Daniel, the love of her life, waiting for her with a heart full of love. But among all the beauty and happiness, there was one guest who mattered the most to Emma, her loyal golden retriever, Max. He had been with her for 7 years, through every high and low. Max wasn't just a pet, he was family. When she had lost her parents in a tragic accident, Max had been her comfort, her reason to smile. He had licked away her tears, sat beside her in the quiet nights, and filled the emptiness in her heart with his love. It was only right that Max had a special role in her wedding. He was wearing a tiny black bounty around his neck, looking adorable and proud. Emma had decided that Max would walk down the aisle with her, just as he had walked beside her in life. "Are you ready, buddy?" she whispered, stroking his soft fur. Max wagged his tail, his warm brown eyes looking up at her with love. As the music began to play, the guests stood up, turning their heads toward the entrance. Emma took a deep breath, holding onto Max's leash. This was it, the moment she had waited for. She stepped forward, her heart swelling with joy. Every eye was on her, but all she could see was Daniel at the altar, his expression filled with love and admiration. With Max walking beside her, everything felt right. But just as she took another step, something unexpected happened. Max suddenly stopped. His body stiffened, and he let out a low, uneasy growl. Emma looked down in confusion. "Max," she whispered, gently tugging on the leash. But he wouldn't move. Instead, he planted his paws firmly on the ground, blocking her path. The guests murmured in confusion, their eyes flickering between Emma and Max. Even Daniel frowned, wondering what was going on. Emma's heart pounded. Why was Max acting this way? Was something wrong? And in that moment, she realized. Max had sensed something she hadn't. Emma's smile faded as she looked down at Max. His body was tense, his ears perked up, and his warm brown eyes were now sharp and alert. He wasn't just stopping, he was blocking her path. A nervous murmur spread among the guests, and Emma could feel their curious gazes on her. She tried to move forward again, but Max wouldn't budge. Instead, he took a step sideways, standing firmly in front of her as if protecting her from something. Emma's heart pounded. This wasn't like him. Max was always calm, friendly, and well-trained. He had walked with her in parks, through crowded streets, and even at the rehearsal dinner last night without any trouble. But now, on her most important day, he was acting strangely. Sarah, standing just a few steps behind, noticed the tension and quickly stepped forward. "Emma, is he okay?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Emma whispered back, her grip tightening on the leash. She knelt down, gently running her fingers through Max's fur. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" she asked in a soothing voice. But Max didn't relax. His eyes remained locked on something, or someone, near the front row of guests. Emma followed his gaze, her heart beating faster with every second. Her guests, dressed in their finest clothes, looked at her with puzzled expressions. Some whispered among themselves, while others simply waited to see what would happen next. And then her eyes landed on a man sitting in the second row. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a face she hadn't seen in years, a face she had once known so well. Jake, Emma's estranged brother. He sat quietly, his hands resting on his lap, his expression unreadable. He looked different from the last time she had seen him, older, maybe a little tired. But there was no mistaking it. It was him. Emma felt a rush of emotions flood her heart. Shock, confusion, and something she couldn't quite name. She and Jake hadn't spoken in years, not since the terrible argument that had torn their family apart. He had left, cutting off contact, and for so long, she had believed she would never see him again. Yet here he was, sitting among the guests at her wedding. Did he come to make peace, or was this just a coincidence? Max let out a small whimper, nudging Emma's hand as if urging her to do something. He had recognized Jake even before she had. He had sensed something she hadn't, the presence of someone who once meant the world to her. Emma swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. What was she supposed to do now? Could she just ignore it and continue walking toward Daniel? Or was this a moment she couldn't afford to miss? The guests continued watching, unaware of the storm of emotions swirling inside her. And in that moment, Emma knew. This wedding had just taken an unexpected turn. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at her brother, Jake. It had been years since she last saw him, and now, on the most important day of her life, he was sitting right there among the guests. Her mind raced with questions. Why was he here? How did he even know about the wedding? And why did Max, her ever-loyal dog, sense something before she did? Max still stood in front of her, his body tense, but no longer growling. Instead, he wagged his tail slightly, as if waiting for Emma to understand what he already knew. He had always been protective of her, but this wasn't just about protection. This was about something deeper, something emotional. The guests whispered among themselves, clearly confused by the unexpected pause. Even the officiant looked puzzled, glancing at Daniel, who stood at the altar with concern in his eyes. Daniel loved Emma with all his heart, but even he didn't know the full story about Jake. Emma had always avoided talking about it, burying the pain deep inside. Sarah gently touched Emma's shoulder. "Emma, is everything okay?" she asked in a hushed voice. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She felt overwhelmed, caught between the past and the present. Jake had been her best friend when they were younger. They had shared childhood secrets, protected each other, and promised to always be there for one another. But that promise had been broken years ago after a terrible fight that neither of them had been able to move past. Looking at him now, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected: regret. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He wasn't here to ruin her wedding. He was here because he missed her. Max, sensing her hesitation, gave a soft whine and nudged her hand. It was almost as if he was telling her, "It's okay. It's time." Emma swallowed hard. This was her wedding day. This was supposed to be about love, about family, about new beginnings. Maybe, just maybe, this was a sign. Maybe today wasn't just about marrying Daniel. It was also about healing old wounds. Slowly, Emma let go of Max's leash and took a small step toward Jake. The guests fell silent, watching in confusion. Jake's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to come to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The past hung between them like a shadow, heavy and unspoken. But then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Emma finally found the courage to say what she had been holding in for so many years. "You came." Jake gave her a small, hesitant nod. "I couldn't miss it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And just like that, Emma felt something inside her shift. The pain, the anger, the years of silence, it all started to melt away. Emma stood frozen in place, her heart racing. The world around her seemed to blur as she looked at her brother, Jake. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she had moved on, that she didn't need him in her life anymore. But now, standing just a few steps away from him, she realized how much she had missed him. The guests were silent now, their whispers fading as they watched the unexpected moment unfold. Even the wedding officiant looked unsure of what to do. Daniel, standing at the altar, remained patient, his expression soft and understanding. He knew Emma well enough to see that something important was happening, something she needed to face. Max, still standing close to her, wagged his tail gently. His job wasn't to stop her anymore. He had brought her to this moment, and now he was letting her decide what to do next. Emma swallowed hard. "Why are you here, Jake?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake let out a slow breath before speaking. "Because I couldn't let this day pass without seeing you," he said. His voice was filled with emotion, a mixture of regret and hope. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But when I heard about your wedding, I knew I had to come. I couldn't let you start this new chapter of your life without at least trying to fix what's broken between us." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent years resenting Jake, blaming him for leaving, for not trying to fix things sooner. But now that he was standing in front of her, she realized something. She had never reached out either. She had let the silence between them grow longer and longer, convincing herself that it was easier that way. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "I thought you didn't care anymore," she admitted softly. Jake shook his head. "I cared, Emma. I always did. I was just too proud, too scared to admit I was wrong." He glanced around at the wedding guests, then back at her. "I don't want to take this moment away from you. I just needed you to know that I love you, and I'm sorry." Emma felt her heart ache. This wasn't how she imagined her wedding day going, but maybe, just maybe, this was exactly how it was meant to be. She took a deep breath and looked at Jake, really looked at him. He wasn't the same person from years ago. He had changed. And maybe she had too. For the first time in years, she let her guard down. "I've missed you," she whispered. Jake's eyes filled with emotion, and before she could say anything else, he stepped forward and wrapped her in a tight hug. The crowd remained silent for a moment, and then, one by one, they started clapping. The past hadn't been erased, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Something new had begun. Emma held on to Jake tightly, feeling the warmth of his embrace after so many years apart. For a moment, everything else faded. The wedding, the guests, even the soft music playing in the background. All that mattered was that her brother was here, standing beside her, just like he used to when they were kids. When they finally pulled away, Jake gave her a small, unsure smile. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I had to be here." Emma shook her head, a tearful smile on her lips. "You didn't ruin anything," she said softly. "You made today even more special." Max, standing between them, gave a happy wag of his tail, his job seemingly complete. Emma knelt down and stroked his golden fur. "You knew, didn't you?" she murmured. Max licked her hand in response, his warm eyes filled with understanding. The guests, who had been watching the emotional reunion in silence, now exchanged smiles. Some wiped away tears, while others clapped softly, touched by the unexpected but beautiful moment. Even Sarah, who had been standing nearby, had tears in her eyes. "I think everyone here just witnessed a miracle," she whispered to Emma with a smile. Emma turned her gaze toward Daniel, who was still waiting at the altar. Instead of looking impatient or frustrated, he simply smiled at her, his love and support shining through his eyes. He had always known how much Emma's past had weighed on her heart. If anyone understood how important this moment was, it was him. She straightened herself and took a deep breath. It was time to continue with the wedding. But before she could take another step, Jake spoke again. "Emma," he said, his voice filled with hesitation. "I know I have no right to ask this, but would it be okay if I stayed?" Emma's heart ached at the uncertainty in his voice. For years, she had wished that Jake would come back into her life, but she had never expected it to happen like this. She could see the guilt in his eyes, the fear that she would push him away again. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "Of course, you can stay," she said, her voice strong and sure. "You're my brother. You belong here." Jake let out a shaky breath, his eyes filled with relief. He nodded, stepping back into the crowd. But this time, he wasn't just another guest. He was family. Emma turned back toward the aisle, this time with Max still by her side, but no longer pulling her back. Instead, he walked forward with her, guiding her toward the future. As she locked eyes with Daniel, she knew that this day wasn't just about love. It was about healing, about second chances, and about the people who truly mattered. With a deep breath, she took her first step forward again, this time with a heart lighter than ever before. Emma felt a new sense of peace as she took slow, steady steps down the aisle. The weight of the past had lifted, making her heart feel lighter. The air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers, the soft rustling of leaves, and the warmth of the sun shining down on her. But more than that, it was filled with love, love from her soon-to-be husband, from her friends and family, and now, once again, from her brother. Max walked proudly beside her, his tail wagging happily. It was as if he knew his job was done. He had brought Emma and Jake back together, just when they needed it the most. He had always been more than just a pet. He was family, her guardian, her best friend. As she got closer to the altar, her eyes locked onto Daniel's. His gaze was steady, filled with admiration and understanding. He had seen everything that had just happened, and instead of looking impatient, he looked proud. Proud of her for facing the past, for opening her heart, for embracing the moment instead of running from it. When she finally reached the altar, Daniel gently took her hands in his. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Emma nodded, smiling softly. Better than ever. The officiant, who had remained patient throughout the unexpected turn of events, cleared his throat and smiled. "Well, I think we can all agree that this day has already been filled with love and reunions," he said warmly. A small wave of laughter rippled through the guests, lightening the mood even more. "Now let's continue this beautiful journey and bring these two hearts together in marriage." Emma took a deep breath, feeling completely present in the moment. She looked at Daniel, the man who had stood by her side through everything, who had never once doubted their love. He was her future, her safe place, her home. As the officiant spoke about love, trust, and partnership, Emma found herself glancing at Jake. He was watching with a soft smile, a look of quiet pride on his face. She had once thought that she would never see him again, that their bond had been broken forever. But today had proven otherwise. Today had shown her that love had the power to heal, to bring people back together, even when they least expected it. When it was time for the vows, Emma spoke from her heart. "Daniel, you have been my rock, my best friend, and the love of my life. Today, I not only promise to be your wife, but I promise to always stand by your side, just like you've stood by mine." Daniel squeezed her hands, his eyes shining with emotion. "Emma, you are my heart, my home, my everything. I promise to love you, to cherish you, and to walk beside you in every chapter of our lives." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as the officiant declared, "You may now kiss the bride." As Daniel leaned in and kissed her, the guests erupted into cheers. Emma knew, in that perfect moment, that this was not just a wedding. It was a new beginning in every way possible. As the cheers and applause filled the air, Emma felt like the happiest person in the world. She held onto Daniel's hands, feeling the warmth and love radiating from him. This was it, the moment she had dreamed of for so long. She was now his wife, and he was her husband. Max barked joyfully, wagging his tail as if he, too, understood the importance of this moment. The guests laughed at his excitement, making the atmosphere even lighter and more joyful. Sarah stepped forward, handing Emma her bouquet again, and whispered, "That was the most beautiful wedding moment I've ever seen." Emma smiled, still overwhelmed with emotions. "It was more than I ever imagined," she admitted. And it was true. This wasn't just about her and Daniel. It was also about the unexpected reunion with Jake, the healing of old wounds, and the power of love in all its forms. As they turned to walk back down the aisle as husband and wife, Daniel leaned in and whispered, "Are you ready for the next adventure, Mrs. Carter?" Emma's heart fluttered at hearing her new last name. She nodded with a radiant smile. More than ready. With that, they walked hand in hand, surrounded by love and cheers, as flower petals were thrown into the air in celebration. Jake stood near the exit, watching with a proud smile. As Emma and Daniel reached him, Emma paused and pulled her brother into a quick hug. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Jake hugged her back tightly. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Daniel reached out and shook Jake's hand. "It's good to finally meet you," he said sincerely. Jake nodded. "It's good to be here," he replied. As the newlyweds made their way to the reception area, the excitement continued to build. The venue was decorated beautifully, with fairy lights twinkling, soft music playing, and a delicious feast waiting for the guests. The air buzzed with happiness, laughter, and heartfelt conversations. During the reception, Emma and Daniel shared their first dance as husband and wife. As they swayed to the soft melody, Emma rested her head on Daniel's chest, feeling completely at peace. Around them, their loved ones watched with smiles, capturing the moment with their phones and cameras. After the dance, it was time for the speeches. Sarah was the first to speak, sharing funny and touching memories about Emma. Then Daniel's best man shared stories of their friendship, making everyone laugh. And then, to Emma's surprise, Jake stood up. The room grew quiet as he took the microphone, a little nervous but determined. "I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome here today," Jake began, looking at Emma. "But my sister has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. She showed me today that love isn't just about moving forward. It's also about forgiving, about letting go of the past and embracing what truly matters." Emma wiped away a tear as Jake continued. "So, to Emma and Daniel, may your love be strong, your laughter endless, and your journey together filled with happiness." The guests clapped warmly, and Emma felt her heart swell with emotion. Today was more than just a wedding. It was a day of love, healing, and new beginnings. The evening was filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of family and friends. Emma sat at the beautifully decorated table beside Daniel, holding his hand and looking around at the people who had come to celebrate their love. The twinkling fairy lights overhead made everything feel magical, like a perfect dream she never wanted to wake up from. Max, lying comfortably near her feet, let out a content sigh. He had been the unexpected hero of the day, and Emma silently thanked him again. Without him, she might never have reconnected with Jake. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he wagged his tail happily. As the night continued, guests enjoyed delicious food, shared stories, and danced under the stars. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in years, surrounded by people who truly cared about her and Daniel. Every moment felt special, but there was still something she needed to do before the night ended. She gently squeezed Daniel's hand and whispered, "I need a moment with Jake." Daniel smiled and nodded. "Take your time," he said. Emma walked over to where Jake was standing, watching the celebration with a thoughtful expression. He had spent so much time away from her life, and she wondered if he felt like he truly belonged here. "You know," she said, standing beside him, "you gave a beautiful speech earlier." Jake chuckled. "I wasn't sure what to say, but it came from the heart." Emma took a deep breath. "I meant it when I said I missed you. I don't want to lose you again, Jake." Jake looked down, as if gathering his thoughts. "I don't want to lose you either, Emma. I know I messed up before, and I can't change the past. But I want to be your brother again. I want to be part of your life." Emma's heart softened. She had spent so many years carrying anger and pain, but today had shown her that love and forgiveness were more powerful than any past mistake. She smiled and reached for his hand. "Then let's start over. No more distance, no more silence. Jake nodded, his eyes shining with emotion. I'd like that. Just then, Sarah ran up to them, breathless with excitement. Emma, it's time for the last dance. Emma laughed and pulled Jake toward the dance floor. Come on, brother. Let's make up for lost time. The final song of the night played, and everyone joined in, dancing and celebrating the beautiful day. Emma twirled in Daniel's arms, feeling like the happiest woman alive. As the song ended, guests clapped and cheered, and Emma looked around at the people she loved. Her husband, her brother, her friends, and of course, Max, who had been the silent guardian of her heart all along. She realized something at that moment. Love wasn't just about marriage. It was about family, about second chances, and about never giving up on the people who mattered. And as she stood there, surrounded by love, she knew that this was just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter.